All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Ghosts of Bacon. I'm your host, Jake Roberts. And don't mind saying, I have a little banner here going saying that we're going to be starting shortly when, in fact, we're going now. Let me get rid of that. All right, so already a lot of people here. Great to see so many familiar faces and names here. Welcome. This evening, I'm really excited about this show because been doing the pre-show here with Cort Lindahl. And the best part of this show for me tonight is I'm going to be able to just sit here and listen. I mean, just visiting with this guy for the last, we've been visiting on and off here for the last hour or so, and we frequently message online. And I always learn so much. And so you guys are, Jan, everyone else, you might want to take a page from Jan's book. Get your popcorn ready because this is going to be fun. We really learned so much from tonight's guest. He's a prolific author, historian, Oak Island theorist, and just so much to say, so many good things to say. And thank you, a welcome one. Happy New Year to you too, my friend. So let's all kind of get behind Cort Lindahl, adding him to the stream. Hey, Cort, welcome to the show, my friend.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jake. I appreciate it.
Well, this is long overdue, my friend. It was when I first started this podcast, one of the very first things that happened, people started popping on here in the live stream messages say, you should really have Cort Lindahl on the show because, you guys definitely see eye to eye and have a big overlap with your information. And sure enough, as I'm reading your book, Timeless Arcadia, as I was telling you in the pre-show, I just learned so much history from your videos, from your book. And, I popped on here, and within just a couple of minutes, we have a full house already here in the live stream. And so people have really been anticipating this. David Clore says hello. Jenny getting inking with it. Hello, sorry I'm late. Jenny, you always say that, but you're never really late. So you're right on time. So
thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Cort, thanks so much for joining us. And what I would like you to do, I'm pretty sure that all the people joining us live already know who you are. Your reputation precedes itself. But for anyone who might be, watching the recording later on, if you could give everyone an overview of who you are, what you do, and your area of real interest in terms of how you dig into history.
Sure. I've always had a healthy interest in history. I worked as a field archaeologist for many years where I kind of learned how to put historical events and places and people in their correct context because that's part of what you do at that job.
Wow,
so
right.
I kind of got injured on the job about 10 years ago.
Oh, gosh.
And at that time just started asking questions or spending some time looking into things I've always been curious about, namely having grown up near Williamsburg. I was always curious about the powder magazine there, which is an octagonal structure that's kind of based on the Tower of the Winds of Athens and everything. And that led me to kind of have this fascination with the architecture of Thomas Jefferson. So that's kind of how I started looking into this, through how these octagonal structures created a prime meridian and how subsequent people kind of used them in some of the treasure stories, I believe, is kind of like a place to measure from, like on a pirate's map or something like that. So lo and behold, just years later, I really did find out how Thomas Jefferson was linked to that concept and through his family and the connections to kind of the world of John Dee and Sir Francis Bacon in Elizabethan England and beyond in the early James I era as well.
Right.
So that's kind of how I got started, basically, on this
Wow.
track.
So cool. And, in your book, you reference the Towers of the Winds and of Athens, and then, of course, at the Shuckborough Hall, and also the Powder magazine. Now, could you explain to the viewers right now, one of the things that a lot of people, modern people, don't realize is that, the ancients, when they referred to the winds, they were actually referring to the directions, and they actually named the cardinal directions after different types of winds.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Could you explain how that kind of works in terms of, like you referenced a pirate's map, and you, on most maps, you have what's called a wind rose, which shows them, the directionals. And again, we have that word wind. So how does, a Tower of the Winds show direction?
Well, the octagonal form of the building itself from plan view infers up to 16 directions just from the geometry involved in the octagon. So the Tower of the Winds of Athens is one of the earliest structures that kind of displays this. They had a deity for each direction of the wind. They had sundials on the south-facing part of the structure that worked at different times of the year and aspects of it like that. And this may have allowed them to fix longitude even. And
Right.
a lot of people suppose there was even a machine like the Antikythera device in the Tower of the Winds that had a pressurized, way to make it work using water. So we're looking at, early in history, the Tower of the Winds is estimated to be from 50 BC to 200 AD. When it was built, nobody knows for sure. But
Right.
this would have allowed them to, relatively accurately map their domain, at least within the boundaries of Greece or some of their colonial holdings beyond that. So this, at that time, was kind of a thing that was all wrapped up in priesthoods and had a lot of spiritual overtones associated with astrology and the early forms of astronomy. So this became valued, I think, by the Byzantine Empire later. Constantine was known to have built a few octagonal structures, including the Daphne Palace in Constantinople, where he lived, was an octagonal room. And then even later, I found that Monticello from Thomas Jefferson was a copy of the Daphne in many regards, with his
Yeah.
octagonal portion of that. So,
And would you, sorry to interrupt, but you referenced Daphne, and you kind of go into this in your book, and I really want to get into, the nuts and bolts of your book, and you can give our viewers a quick overview. But let's see, we have already a question about the octagonal structure here. So Cort, do the octagonal structures represent any sort of esoteric truth? True, significant esoteric religious structures provide both function and symbolic meaning.
well, that's a great question, and it feeds right into what I was going to say next anyway, because the Arcadian theme, that my whole book is about, and how it kind of is attached to a lot of these treasure stories and interesting historical stories like Sir Francis Bacon that we all love, is kind of based on the Greek mythology of the character Arcas, who, through a series of events, he and his mother are cast into the heavens by Zeus as Ursa Major for his mother Callisto,
Mm-hmm.
and he is Ursa Minor. And the tale of Ursa Minor, the bear, these are the circumpolar bears, the constellations. The tale of Ursa Minor includes the pole star. So that's a kind of integral part of orienting oneself on the earth, as it's used even with these octagonal structures that were kind of crude observatories of the time. So that whole mythology of Arcas, who is the namesake of Arcadia, may be viewed as kind of being an allegory for, geography and map making of the era, or how rulers would define their domain.
Right.
So through time, it became a kind of a known secret that, the upper echelons or elite people knew about more. But as navigation became more common in trade and with ships trading, that this became more known and seen as kind of a way to hide things as well, in kind of an alchemical sense, even.
Right.
That many overlook. It's kind of a coded way that you can even hide things in maps.
Funny you should mention that. We were just kind of talking about that pre-show. So yeah, that's really the idea of the Arcadian theme. Now, this is what really is the underlying unifying theme of your book. And so if you would you kind of like go over that in terms of what is this motif of Arcadia, and why do we have this as a common thread running through these different eras of history? It's
right.
Such a cool story.
Yeah, again, kind of through the elite people or later rulers of Europe, the Arcadian theme through the works of the poet Virgil, actually from just before the time of Christ, became viewed as a longing for a utopia, in which their way of life, made the world a pastoral paradise based on the Arcadian myths of ancient Greece. And Rome as well had their version of it later. We all know how they adapted the Greek mythology and concepts and valued things like democracy, and in certain cases that it became a big thing in Rome as well. So Virgil is kind of important to understand, because he kind of propagated the popularity of this concept through a really wide span of history. Constantine even had a value of the works of Virgil, for instance, and he became viewed as kind of like a Nostradamus character, in which the eclogues in the Aeneid of Virgil were used for bibliomancy, where people would divine answers to questions they had, somewhat like in astrology or the tarot, where they would randomly pick a passage of Virgil and it would foretell or give them advice about what to do in their life or what may happen to them. And there's a few examples in history of that, where Charles I consulted Virgil and it foretold of his coming doom, for instance.
Right. And yeah, and a lot of people today, aren't familiar with the whole concept of bibliomancy, where, they would basically meditate upon a question and then randomly open a book to a page and then look for an answer there on that page. It's funny. You just talk about the eclogues. Dan Spino just posted a question about eclogue 5, or a statement. He thinks that Virgil's eclogues 5 figure prominently in the Arcadian theme and what is hidden on Oak Island. Interesting thought, Daniel.
I can't address eclogue 5 right off the bat.
Yeah, me, not
although
not
I've read
top of my head.
Yeah. But thanks for the question. No, one of the interesting things about Virgil is, we all have this mania of the Poussin painting, the shepherds of Arcadia, how they're contemplating the tomb. That is part of the eclogues as well, where it's revealed that the Roman mythological character Daphnis is who is in the tomb.
Right.
So with kind of this mystical overlay of an appreciation of Virgil, people would speculate, like Constantine believed it was Julius Caesar in the tomb, or Christ in the tomb. That kind of feeds into these theories of him having survived, the alternate Christian views of Mary Magdalene and things like that we see manifest themselves later in stories like Reign le Chateau.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, the eclogues are well worth the read. They're not very long and they're interesting. And you can see some of the concepts in there, as Daniel points out, that can help you understand the whole rest of it in terms of the elite, the de Medici family, the royalty of Europe and royalty of England having a huge appreciation of the concept of Arcadia, and how they, could have hidden cloistered secrets in the way they appreciated it. And through the whole history of it, you do see these kind of alchemical towers, which relates to the Tower of the Winds. They became known as that, or even Magdala's later, which means fish tower too, when that concept became popular in Europe with a lot of elite people believing they were related to Mary Magdalene or Christ himself.
Right.
So that's an important aspect of why they liked Virgil and appreciated the Arcadian theme and art and music, literature, and so on. So there are a lot of aspects of it that came to be kind of an exclusive belief system.
Right. And, of interest to members of Ghosts of Bacon, I based my work upon the plaque on Bacon, or excuse me, Shakespeare's funerary monument.
A
And
little slip there, right?
little slip there. We have looked at Bacon's monument as well, but that's a story for another day. But on Shakespeare's plaque itself, he refers to Shakespeare as a Virgil with the last name of Moronum. A lot of people don't realize that the reference to Moronum is actually Virgil's last name. And so again, you have this veneration of Virgil, and I think it's due to probably this theme and motif of Arcadia.
Yes, and during that period, there's a lot of literature and art that had already been done previously, where people were displaying exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
In the period of Sir Francis Bacon during his life, especially.
Right. And of course, here's our friend John. He's putting his initials up here. Hidden in maps. Do you believe or subscribe to truths or secrets being hidden in maps?
Yes, I do. I think at certain points, I mean, even later during the Civil War, it's pretty well known that the Knights of the Golden Circle used octagonal templates in order to hide things for spies and, caches of gold and weapons and things like that.
Right.
So earlier in history, I think this was also used in kind of a spiritual way, where even somebody who might have built the Tower of the Winds on their estate, like the Anson family at Shugborough Hall, may have oriented the structure, to display some of their secrets or their values in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way. And even their good friend Sir Francis Dashwood, who's kind of famous for the quote Hellfire Club.
Hellfire Club.
Yeah,
Benjamin Franklin.
He had a Tower of the Winds on his estate too in West Wickham. Even the his mausoleum is a hexagonal reproduction of the forecourt of Baalbek.
Oh, wow.
Where he had actually traveled to as part of the Society of the Dilettanti.
So, yeah.
Yeah, he was part of a group of these kind of upper crust Englishmen that traveled, went on tour, the grand tour in Europe, but they were seriously concerned themselves with creating accurate plan views of a lot of ruins like the Tower of the Winds and Baalbek and other places. So they were kind of hip to this whole concept, and I believe that's why they ended up having Towers of the Winds on their property, to kind of display their knowledge of such a thing. And by the way, I think that the Tower of the Winds at Shugborough actually points to Oak Island, one of the directions inferred by that.
You actually had that in one of your latest videos that I watched.
Yes.
You actually showed the arc of how it points to Oak Island.
Right, as well as I can measure it on Google Earth. It would be nice to go there with the GPS, and actually see. But I don't think they were going for that kind of accuracy. I think within the terms of navigation of that era when it was built, that it's possible that that's what they were meaning. And we know a lot of other researchers point to the Shepherd's Monument at Shugborough Hall that has a bas-relief mirror image of the Poussin painting on it. Many people theorize that's also connected to Oak Island.
Right. And, it's funny, until I read your book, I hadn't realized that there was a Tower of the Winds at Shugborough Hall. I was always interested, obviously, in the bas-relief, but and also you actually singled out that the difference between the Poussin painting and that bas-relief at Shugborough Hall, that there is also a box structure on top of the tomb. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, and that's going to lead us to Philip Sidney's Arcadia, his book
hoping so. Okay.
that he wrote for his sister, because within the book, well, when I first started looking into Arcadia, I noticed that Rennes-le-Château and Shugborough Hall and the Acadia, the French name for Nova Scotia, all referenced Arcadia, and began to wonder why. So one day I just decided to look through Philip Sidney's book, to kind of get some clues about why this was important to them. And lo and behold, there's a story in the book that involves a money pit situated beneath an oak tree that has a, quote, graven stone, not unlike the cover of a tomb, at the bottom of the pit, with parchments concealed beneath the pit. But on top of the stone is what is known as Aristomenes' box. So Aristomenes, again, leads us to the Greek land of Arcadia, where he was an Arcadian general who, quote, buried a great treasure in Arcadia during one of the wars with the Spartans. And what he buried is, from different sources, was either a votive statue of Pallas Athena or a tablet that revealed the secrets of the Eleusinian mysteries. So it's interesting that this is referenced in the story that Philip Sidney wrote as well. And we all know that people suspect there's a vault in there, like when they drilling in a certain place, there's something they hit that they believe is at the right level as the 90-foot stone. So the graven stone in Philip Sidney's story is analogous to the 90-foot stone story of Oak Island.
Right.
So the correlations don't end there. Later, in about 1613, the Baron of Nova Scotia actually amended Philip Sidney's Arcadia with a new chapter that I believe refers to the family, the Herbert family of Mary Sidney Herbert, his sister. It involves the story of a Black Knight coming and doing combat, and that part of their family history involves such a character that was known of as the Black Knight.
And then that was Sir William Alexander who did that.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Excuse me. Which is interesting, too, because later his family does relate to American history in a big way, because he was a courtier of Charles I, and we know that during the English Civil War, his supporters were all Cavaliers, they were known of. And his family, brother's family, was exiled to America because of that during that time in the 1650s, beginning about then. And even Alexandria, Virginia, is named after them. But most interestingly, during the American Revolution, we have Continental Army General William Alexander, actually prior to the war, attempting to claim the titles of Baron of Nova Scotia and Earl of Stirling. So that's how strongly they felt about all those connections, that they were important to them. And in Virginia history, you see a lot of influence of the Cavaliers and Charles I and II in that era of history from the mid 1600s to 1700 in a big way. The Stuart family, which we've discussed before.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue into, in your book, you make reference to the lost Stuart kings. And of course, you're referring to Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles II, and how, they had ended up losing, their reign. In my aspect of it, and the research that I've done, and, the cipher texts of the plaque and other sources that I've actually found to corroborate it, are stating that Sir Francis Bacon was that lost Stuart king. And it's funny, in pre-show, you actually mentioned Sir Walter Scott, and he used to have a tradition, he would write books on a very romantic ideal. And one of the references that he would make would be to, a prince who lost his throne, the lost Dauphin, for example, which is what, in my opinion, Sir Francis Bacon was. And so, I've identified this sort of tradition in particularly, 19th century literature, where you have a lot of writers who seem to know that specific truth, and they kind of put it in their books as sort of a theme, as sort of a nod, a wink and a nod to other people who have also unraveled that same secret. And so, the idea that you tapped in on this tradition of the lost Stuart kings, I found to be just obviously fascinating and very reassuring in terms of how it ties in with all of the stuff that I've done. So could you talk about how they kind of were, shoved off to the wayside here, and how does it tie into this, in your opinion, that this motif of Arcadia?
Right. Well, that's a great question, and it's really interesting that your conclusions are that he was the progeny of Mary Queen of Scots, because all of the Stuarts were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Starting with James the First, Charles the First, Second, James the Second, and so on, and even William and Mary. King William later were both directly related, and even the quote Hanoverian later kings of England have that blood through Charles the First's sister, and so on. So there's connections are there, and it was really interesting to find all of these kind of aspects of history related to the Stuart family that seemed to be them even actualizing plot elements of Philip Sidney's book.
Right.
And this kind of began with Queen Elizabeth, really, and Philip Sidney's cousin, Francis Godolphin, who built Star Castle on the Isles of Scilly, which is part of England off the southwest coast of England. That was a star-shaped fort or lodge, Pamela's Lodge, as it's termed in Philip Sidney's book, that they actually built this structure having been inspired by the description of these two octagonal star-shaped lodges that were mentioned briefly in the book and referenced a few times in passing in the book as well, that Philip Sidney's cousin actually built the structure as a kind of a monument to Philip Sidney. So then we kind of flash forward a little bit to about 1646 at the beginning of the, quote, English Civil War, where Charles II, as a young man, is actually living in Star Castle on the Isles of Scilly.
Right.
So at that point, I can only imagine that he knew the story about why the castle was built the way it was. And it's described in the book as a larger star-shaped lodge connected to a smaller one by the tail of a comet, quote unquote. So later, it was very interesting. I mentioned already how Charles I referred to Virgil, which is another Arcadian link there, which foretold his coming doom. And then his last words right before he was to be beheaded
Pamela's
Pamela's prayer from Philip Sidney's book.
Right.
So it's just amazing that we see that. And then later, I guess this is a little more of a stretch, but I believe the Newport Tower is the second star-shaped lodge that was built. Because if you reason out that Benedict Arnold Sr., not the traitor later from the Revolution, his grandfather, I believe he was, or great-grandfather, that he was the first governor of Rhode Island. And he was made so by Charles II, who gave Rhode Island a very liberal charter that especially spoke to religious freedom. And that's exactly what the theme of Pamela's prayer is that Charles I had quoted before his death. So lately I have found a lot of rationale that could say what I'm saying is correct through Benedict Arnold's association with Governor Winthrop from Connecticut, who was an alchemist, who traveled extensively in those circles in England before and during the time he was even governor of Connecticut. That at least displays that there were people there that had those values and would have been aware of these things.
Right.
And we see Winthrop dealing directly with Charles II to get his charter for Connecticut, and Benedict Arnold sending representatives there too, to where it's not too far out of the realm of possibility that Charles II dictated that the Newport Tower be built in veneration of Philip Sidney's Arcadia, and it's kind of a memento mori to his father, Charles I.
And that makes a lot of sense, Cort. It really does. Especially, a lot of, modern archaeologists date the Newport Tower to the exact era that you're referencing. And, one of the things you discuss in your book also is how people want to ascribe, or people back then, after the Revolutionary War, wanted to ascribe the Newport Tower to either the Vikings, or more likely the Knights Templar, and because of the association of the name Benedict Arnold, right? Is it?
Yeah,
You discussed that?
Yeah, during like the early 1800s and so on, America was a very patriotic place where a lot of artists and writers wanted to present the American ideal. And the story that I'm suggesting about the Newport Tower just didn't fit that template because of Benedict Arnold, that name being associated with that structure. And there was also a big movement to try to associate Norse culture having affected Native Americans, or later we see people saying the same things about the Knights Templar, which it disappoints a lot of people, but I just don't believe those theories very much. And they're possible, but it would be really nice to see better proof than we've been given along the line to suggest any of that's true. And the Newport Tower just doesn't fit the bill. Yeah. And just real quick too, the octagonal form of the powder magazine in Williamsburg points to the Newport Tower.
Okay.
So there's an interesting connection there too.
Yeah.
In that the man who designed the street plan of Williamsburg was the governor of Virginia, his name was Francis Nicholson at that time. He was also designed the street plan of Annapolis, Maryland, which is pretty interesting too if you look at the early original version of it. But he was also one of the founders of the Trinity Church in Newport. So there's kind of another loose thread of information there that could suggest he was aware of all of this, and that people in Virginia had built their Tower of the Winds or their octagonal lodge from Philip Sidney's Arcadia oriented to actually point the way to the Newport Tower. And that was built in about 1715, right at the beginning of near the time of the first Jacobite rebellion of James II, or James III, excuse me.
Okay. Eddie, I've just been kind of remiss in my duties here. I'm just sitting here listening to you do what you do, and just tell the story. And I'm missing all of the the chats here.
Feel free.
It's so, I have to give this comment a special nod here. Jenny wants to know, is that who the Black Knight and Monty Python is based on? It was only a flesh wound, Jenny.
Right. That's a kind of common theme, that the Black Knight, like in Scottish history, for instance, Sir James Douglas was known as the Black Knight, or the Black Douglas.
Right.
So anytime you had a knight that was a marauder that the enemy feared, he would often become known as that. So I'm sure that's where the Monty Python got that idea to include, because it's in a lot of literature. It's not just in Philip Sidney's book or what the Baron of Nova Scotia wrote. It's the Black Knight's a popular concept in that era.
Yeah. Our friend John, of course, pops on with a little tidbit, and the Stuarts' relations to Masonry via the Jacobites, which many people have overlooked, and they do overlook that. You're right, John.
Absolutely true. And in fact, a lot of the things I think that people see and why they think the Knights Templar came to America or had something to do with Oak Island or other similar strange stories, I think can be more attributed to the Jacobites, because they did form this kind of Freemasonry that was kind of an intelligence service for them in their efforts to regain their crowns after James II was ousted as king.
Right. And one of the cipher texts I unraveled, Bacon actually states that his Fama fraternity, his famous fraternity, the RC, evolved into Freemasonry. So it seems that he would have, kind of been the progenitor of this speculative side of the organization as it had always existed. And it would make sense if there was a tradition encoded into it in reference to the Stuart line and the Stuart Kings. John Edwards and I did a podcast a while back where we talked about the relationship between the Rosicross and Freemasonry and how that kind of came about. And we were able to actually kind of, dissect that little thread and be able to parse that out. So that makes perfect sense, Cort.
Sure. And you can see that kind of even, manifesting itself in the first folio.
Yeah.
And which is something I'm sure you've looked at a lot. And people find codes in and ciphers that, like Peter Admonson, for instance.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is the dedicatees of the first folio are Philip Sidney's nephews, William and Philip Herbert, the sons of Mary Sidney Herbert, his sister.
Okay.
So when you look at things like that, sometimes I wonder that in addition to the influence of Sir Francis Bacon, obviously, that the people that funded the publishing of the first folio, for instance, could have also been behind making sure these things were included in the way the folio was laid out and printed.
Yes.
Which gives you a lot of the geometric associations and those kind of aspects of that.
Yeah,
so
and all the different aspects that Peter had also analyzed as well, like you had mentioned.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure you're familiar too with the other theory of who was Bacon's real parents, with Queen Elizabeth and Sir Robert Dudley actually being his parents. And if that were to be true, then Bacon would have been the first cousin of Philip Sidney. Yeah.
Right.
And so on.
Well, what's interesting is one of the messages I found was that Robert Devereux, second Earl of Essex, was definitively the son of Robert Dudley and Queen Elizabeth.
Right. So and he could have also had a lot to do with all the goings on as well. If you buy into the theory that a group of people were the ones who wrote the works of Shakespeare in a cooperative effort, or they were inspired by each other.
Right.
And whoever wrote it used a lot of what they did to do it. So that makes a lot of sense. But I love your Mary Queen of Scots idea. That's really cool, because that really makes a lot of sense as well, is the way things unfolded over 100 years. That could be true. Yeah,
it really does, especially in terms of how Elizabeth, treated Bacon early on in his career, and also, there's another aspect of it that I haven't shared out yet, because I'm still finding corroborating evidence to support it. But there's certain aspects of it that actually explain Essex's rebellion as well, and so when you look at all these pieces together, everything just kind of falls into place. All of the evidence that supports that Bacon was Elizabeth's son, for example, also supports that he was the son of Mary. All of the same exact, circumstantial evidence. It all lines up.
Right. And they were cousins anyway, right?
Elizabeth. And they were cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I wish I had been the one to even come up with the idea or the theory. I just found the message that says it. And,
right.
And what's interesting is being able to find, all of these other corroborating messages as well. And once you have that one piece of the puzzle, everything kind of falls into place. And then what I've been doing lately, my next book, after the one you and I talked about, is called The Ghosts of Bacon, which is where I got the name of the podcast in this group, where I'm actually tracing Bacon's aliases. And what I've been able to so far figure out is the network that Sir Francis Bacon used in his intelligence operations for Essex, actually, it involved himself, obviously, Anthony Bacon, and Sir Walter Raleigh primarily. And for whatever reason, it also involved his work with Shakespeare. And so, again, still kind of parsing that out and exactly how that works. But it all ties in exactly with everything that I've read in your book so far. So it's just
right. And that's
really
kind of
really
great
stuff.
Some of the genealogy is revealing in that way. as well, because of the way they valued their titles and would keep track of who they're related to. Even if it was secret, there might have been a way for the other family members to later figure all these things out. I mean, we even see Philip Herbert, one of the dedicatees of the First Folio, being married to the daughter of the 17th Earl of Oxford.
Right.
So it's kind of
Very.
this tight family, ties. And we even see even William Shakespeare himself having distant relations to the De Clare family in his past that are interesting in terms of the Knights Templar, the real history of the Knights Templar, and other aspects of history that may have led up to all of this.
Yeah, could you kind of give the viewers an outline of that? Because this is one of the threads that I think that you do so well in your book, where what you do is you were talking about how just when you look at family connections, that's where you can actually see this thread of knowledge kind of being passed down and within the network of the family itself. It's almost as if those families, the familial network was actually also a part of, and it was a lot of times a part of that whole spy network at the same time.
Exactly. And that even Philip Sidney himself, of course, was the son-in-law of Sir Francis Walsingham, the spy master of Queen Elizabeth. And you can see that some of his travels and things that he did, he was present with Walsingham and Robert Beale, for instance, which is another name treasure lovers know about, at the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre.
Yes.
In Paris. And I can't remember the exact date. I think 1572, I want to say, something in that range.
It's in that area. It's in that area. Yeah.
And even, as far as Oak Island goes, that's famous for Francois Rochefoucauld being one of the victims of the massacre, as he was a Huguenot at the time. That could be, relate to the Rochefoucauld name and the theories about the Duc d'Anville, the Rochefoucauld possibly leaving something on Oak Island that we discussed on the show when I appeared on it.
Right.
So there's a lot of interesting connections. Even I found Thomas Jefferson related directly, not by blood, to Philip Sidney via Thomas Randolph, who was Walsingham's brother-in-law. So they undoubtedly knew each other. And this is a direct forebear of Thomas Jefferson. And even in that crowd of Elizabethan authors and poets, another Thomas Randolph that was a direct forebear of Thomas Jefferson was part of the, quote, tribe of Ben Jonson, known as the Cavalier Poets.
Right.
So that's one reason I think Thomas Jefferson was so interested in Sir Francis Bacon and considered him one of his favorite authors, or one of his three favorite human beings. Even.
Yeah. Well, he was, and it's funny. The word Cavalier keeps coming up. Is what I told you in the pre-show. I keep seeing it come up in all of these different areas, and so what I do is I get a little curious when I see a recurring word over and over again amongst different groups. And so I do a quick calculation with Bacon's ciphers, and sure enough, Cavalier equals 67 in simple cipher. For all of you regular viewers, that represents the name Francis. It's 133 in reverse cipher and 197 in K cipher. Just kind of throwing that out there for our regulars. Dan Spino, I want you to know, Cort, don't say anything about Edward de Vere because Jake freaks out. It's not that I freak out, Daniel. It's just that there's no evidence to support anything with de Vere writing Shakespeare. That's all. It's okay that you like that theory. I encourage that sort of behavior. I love dissenting voices for sure.
No, that's interesting that you say that, because I've read some points of view that said he was kind of made the scapegoat on purpose and that he didn't really have any, you know what I mean?
Well, what's funny is with the work that I've been doing with the Intelligence Circle and Network, Bacon and Walter Raleigh had this thing where with their own aliases, where if you calculate them with the superficial or the regular ciphers, simple reverse and K ciphers, they're like if Bacon came up with Shakespeare as an alias, or he used him as a mask. And the way he spelled the name, when you calculate it, it's actually 177 in simple cipher. That is Walter Raleigh's number in reverse cipher. So what they would do is try to set the other up with the aliases in the supervision. It was kind of like this game they were playing. Walt Raleigh has one that he used that actually it's full of Bacon ciphers. And what I was able to do was kind of parse out the formula of how they actually calculated the values of their aliases. It looks like it was kind of like this little game they were playing.
Well, that makes a lot of sense too. That they would have a way to communicate like that.
Yeah,
the options are endless as far as what they can do in secrecy using things like that. And we know all these people were associated with Dr. John Dee. If you read his journal, you see all of these names continually pop up, including Robert Beale and Thomas Randolph and Sir Francis Bacon and Mary Sidney Herbert and Philip Sidney are all mentioned, more than once in the course of that.
Yeah, it's all interrelated. Let's see, John, again, Cort, since the layout of the King James Bible 1611 was directly overseen by Francis Bacon, there would be no influence from outside forces unless it went directly through Bacon. The 1611 KJV has mistakes, printer's errors, and so on, which actually are usually clues in coding, commiserate with other mistakes found in the first folio, and even a map attributed to Drake. Very cool, John.
Yeah, that is interesting, and no doubt that he approved whatever went in there, even though there were supposedly other scholars that may have submitted information that went through him that would have been put in there, that he was kind of the master of all that. But that's really interesting about the map with Drake too, because he's a good Oak Island suspect as well. He was close friends with Philip Sidney. There's stories that even Queen Elizabeth herself had to stop Philip Sidney from going on the circumnavigation voyage.
Right.
That just displays, what friends they were.
Right.
So it's interesting that at one point too, Drake's fleet stopped at the Lost Colony, of Sir Walter Raleigh's, and stayed for a while. And that could be one of the theories about where some of the colonists may have simply just left with him as well.
And there wasn't even there a theory that he may have just actually it may have been something I read on your blog that he may have picked them up and taken them to Nova Scotia.
The other people say that. I'm not so sure about Nova Scotia, though that's entirely possible, that if you wanted to build a theory that Sir Francis Drake had left the Oak Island treasure, that would explain why Philip Sidney's story was similar. The story in his book Arcadia, because they were close friends. And even on Sidney's Penhurst estate in England, there's even what is known as the Sidney Oak. And the legend holds that acorns from that tree had been planted all over the world. And who better than his close friend that traveled all over the world, Sir Francis Drake, to have planted some of those acorns, even possibly on Oak Island. And Drake, as we know, had access to all kinds of treasures that he recovered. Even on the trip where he visited the Lost Colony, he had just sacked Cartagena and St. Augustine, so there would have been some riches there with him even at that time.
Oh, yeah.
And also what is interesting about the Lost Colony is Thomas Harriot, who was a famous alchemist and in that circle of people as well, was present there for several months and probably drew what is known of as the Virginia Pars map.
Right, and that was the one that had the location of a fort, but then it was covered up. Is that the same map?
Right, and then if you look at the location of the fort, this is really interesting. The concept of the sacred longitude of Dr. John Dee comes into play.
Right.
Because the fort is right next to that line of latitude, as well as you can compare it to Google Earth or modern means.
Sure.
It's right there. And lo and behold, later we see Washington, D.C. built on the same meridian.
Same meridian, yeah.
Possibly by, Thomas Jefferson's influence was there. And even the White House meridian matches very close to the location of the hidden fort on the map.
Right.
And here in modern times, archaeologist Nick Lucchetti from Jamestown Archaeology has found a site right near the location of the fort on the map that includes the lead seals, like one of the, similar to the one they found on Oak Island recently,
yeah.
and several other artifacts that date to too early in colonial times that they match the lost colony and not the later efforts.
That's really neat.
So he's even theorizing that some of them went there, and that may have been the original plan before they settled it at Roanoke Island, which is safer. It's an island. It's accessible, closer to the ocean. That they may have had plans later to move to where that fort was marked on the map. Originally, that may have been their goal.
Yeah, so interesting. Tom Burns, one of our regular viewers, always has great questions. And this is a question that people often will kind of ask me too when it comes to the Rosy Cross and Sir Francis Bacon. He's asking, so many people are associated with Templar or Masonic groups or their evolving variations. How can we draw conclusions or even eliminate which representatives were anywhere?
Well, that's a tough question.
Such a great question. Yeah.
But what I always point to with, for example, of the people's suspicions of Knights Templar being involved in pre-Columbian America would be that when people did first start settling or exploring the Americas, that knighthoods were heavily involved. And many of these did have connections to the Knights Templar, or originally had members from the Knights Templar involved. We see the French, having Knights of St. John or Knights of Malta, Knights of the Holy Spirit, Knights of St. Louis involved, that use all similar iconography in their medals and the things that natives would see if they saw some of these people. And then in Spain, we have the Knights of Santiago, Alcantara, Montesa, and so on, that even Montesa was formed from former Knights Templar at first, and they have similar images and imagery associated with them. So to me, that could be one of the reasons, that influenced Native American lore, and later people just kind of, cherry picked, if you will, that this was the original Knights Templar, when there really isn't much proof that is true. Right. So as far as that goes, the influence of the Knights Templar, I think, could have possibly influenced Sir Francis Bacon, for instance, who you see this theme in Philip Sidney, a lot of the people that are associated with that crowd, that they were really maybe trying to work towards a republic, form of government.
I see the same thing. Yeah.
100%. So that the Knights Templar being persecuted the way they were, probably due to a lot of their independence, the banking, all of the things point to they were kind of a military without any ruler anymore to guide them, as the Latin kings had lost all of their temporal powers at the end of the Crusades.
Right.
So just the concept of the Knights Templar is there, and later how it became enmeshed in Freemasonry, beginning with the Jacobite Freemasonry, who actually used a lot of the imagery. They called each other Chevalier this or Chevalier that, Cavalier, same word again, popping up in French. That through the oration of Chevalier Ramsay, for instance, he was the first to kind of link the Templar Knights or the chivalric orders to Freemasonry. And I think that's true. If you look back even into the equine orders of Rome, you can see that they had values very similar to the stonemasons. Right. Even in some of the stories I read in medieval novels like Amadis de Gaula, with the description of the Firm Island that has a treasury on the island surrounded by 3 pillars, and the 3 pillars of wisdom and strength and beauty are later a Masonic concept. So even in that mid 13th century piece of fiction, you're seeing knighthoods being associated with such things.
Right. And Tom, the way I try to answer that question, and thanks for that, Cort. I mean, that really kind of helps flesh out, kind of what I see it in terms of all of these groups kind of splinter sometimes, where you have factions that kind of splinter off. And what I always look for is context. It's all about that sort of context. What are the connections between? We need a direct link, between someone we can definitively say, oh, this is someone who is descended from a known Knights Templar, and you have to kind of establish that sort of connection. Otherwise, as Cort just expertly delineated there, is that so many of these groups have splintered from the same trunk, if you will, and they use the same iconography, the same symbols, the same symbolism, and a lot of the same ideas. In this case, and in kind of what you were hinting at, this idea of a republic, kind of what the ideal that Sir Francis Bacon was talking about in A New Atlantis. It was just a reiteration of the same ideas. And I would point to The History of the World by Sir Walter Raleigh, which James I had a real problem with, as he referred to it as being a bit too saucy against princes and kings. He was being a little harsh in terms of how people were ruling at the time. So I don't know. I kind of always look for, that kind of direct line. Dan Spino's popping on with a nice tidbit. Again, another connection between Thomas Jefferson. He's speaking Thomas Jefferson, when governor of Virginia, it seems he let Captain James Anderson off the hook for treason.
Well, that's news to me, Daniel. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I'd never heard that before. Thanks, Daniel. Pretty interesting. Kind of going down through and Jason Mercer, it suggested Philip and Sister Mary Sidney translated Psalms.
Yes, he did a version of that earlier as well. He has a lot of other publications I haven't even had a chance to read yet. But he did run in some interesting circles. I mean, he was close friends with Giordano Bruno, who was basically burned at the stake. And he dedicated one. Yeah, he dedicated one of his books to Philip Sidney. So that kind of speaks to the part of Philip Sidney engaging in intelligence gathering activities, and really, speaks to kind of the age-old conflict of science versus religion that they were also kind of breaking out of in a big way in England, specifically because of their separation from the Latin Church. It allowed for this explosion of that,
Yeah, it does. It also speaks to the Republic of Letters. Bacon, his associates, they were kind of creating this republic across borders, just by writing to each other. And I think Bruno was a big part of that as well. I mean, it's obvious in a lot of his ideas.
Right. If you look at even the threads of like the French Revolution, later involves a lot of concepts like that, although that one might have gotten a little out of control.
Just a bit.
In those terms, yeah.
So they kind of, forgive the pun, they lost their heads over that one. Jason Mercer, great question. Did Philip write Arcadia before he died? It appears to be an opportunity for Sister Mary Sidney to co-author this book with Sir Francis Bacon. That's an interesting idea. I thought he had finished it before he died, though.
Yes, he finished it, and supposedly by about 1570, and then it wasn't published till the early 1580s. But his sister did edit it, and a few minor changes were made, but the whole basic story was already there. And the story of the treasure pit, for instance, is in the old Arcadia, they call it, before she edited it.
Right. There was the old Arcadia, and then the new Arcadia was actually expanded. They actually it added some parts other than just editing too, hadn't they?
Yeah. I think in some ways as well, Sir Francis Bacon, in some ways, he was very young when Philip Sidney passed.
Right.
So he kind of took Philip Sidney's place in some ways in all of these connections. And I'm not saying he wouldn't have anyway, but he was
Right.
involved with all the same people, Dr. John Dee, the intelligence apparatus and everything of
Yeah.
Elizabeth. So he kind of followed in the footsteps of Philip Sidney, at least, I would
Yeah.
say.
Makes a lot of sense. Jason's following up with an interesting question. Hadn't thought of this. Did Mary and Francis have a romantic connection? And is there anything in Arcadia to suggest this concealed affair? Not that
There's
I've seen,
nothing,
but
not that I've seen either. That's an interesting idea, though. I'm sure they
yeah, it
knew
is.
each other
Yeah.
and were associated with each other and held a lot of the same values because they ran in the same circles and had a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
same associates. I've seen no hint that they were personally involved
Right.
at all. I'm sure they were friends. At least they were both courtiers of Elizabeth and attended functions together and had a lot of the same goals, it seems, too, through their family
Oh, okay.
values and goals that, were challenged a little bit, I think, when James the First took over. And they began to see, I think, that they had to maybe continue to operate as far as what we were saying about them possibly being interested in a constitutional form of government or a republic in a more secret way, possibly when the
Okay.
Stuarts regained the crown.
Sure. Which again, it just makes perfect sense. You think about this idea of how they would operate logically, everything falls in place. There's been this little back and forth here in the chat. I couldn't keep up with all of it, but one of the things that people are kind of discussing here in the chat, Cort, is this idea of, do you think that Philip Sidney's Arcadia was recording history, or was history imitating art? So people are wondering, did they use Sidney's story, his book, as a map in terms of creating the money pit, or was he writing about the money pit? Is what people want to know.
Right. I would lean more towards he just innocently wrote this book. Like, as you mentioned before, a lot of the literature kind of in a veiled way included criticisms of the powers that be of the time.
Right. Right.
So I think that's what he was engaged in, but this became so appreciated later that the Stuarts, with their predilection towards valuing Arcadia and the works of Virgil, came to appreciate his works and actually made real aspects of history occur based on the plot of the book.
Right.
So he may not have had any intention of that happening at that point, but other people seeing this happen may have realized, well, we can write something that will have exactly that effect on people,
Right. Right.
And I think, there's probably a few factors of Sir Francis Bacon, for example, that people may misinterpret, that he didn't mean it that way, that I'm not talking
Sure.
about the codes. I'm talking about
Right.
themes like the New Atlantis.
New Atlantis. Yeah.
And for example, or advancement of learning, that
Mm-hmm.
they may have applied, later people may apply a lot of significance to that he didn't intend.
It didn't intend. Yeah, I agree.
When in other cases, he definitely did, obviously through the codes and the ciphers, that part of it, but thematic things and political concepts and aspects like that could be misinterpreted later.
Oh, absolutely. When we look back, through our own lenses, lenses of a modern, we often will kind of misread in terms of our own value systems and take our own cognitive biases and apply them and, onto people of the past, when in fact, that they had a different value system going on at work here. That's one of the questions people always ask me is how did, Bacon and his friends, how are they able to accomplish so much? And I have to remind people that they didn't have the distractions back then that we have today. We have a completely different way that we view the world than how they viewed it, and how they viewed their place in it, and what their role was, and how they spent their time. For them, creating ciphers and writing something like Arcadia. I mean, this was their form of entertainment. It wasn't, instead of, we're surrounded by constant distractions today.
Right.
And what they did was they focused their attention. Yeah.
Right. He wrote the book for his sister, is
Right.
what the story is told, and that's believable. And later people, I think, including her, may have recognized things in there that they could use in a secretive manner,
Right.
metaphorically or allegorically. And it's interesting that, the story of Oak Island did over time come to resemble the story in the book and the story from the Book of Enoch that's also valued by Freemasons, as you point out. And
Yeah.
John Edwards points out, and a lot of my other friends as well are kind of hip to that aspect of everything too.
Which
So
would have been the perfect element. Sorry to interrupt. Would have been the perfect element for Philip Sidney to incorporate into his work, because he obviously would have been well aware.
Right. That's
of that whole
probably
idea.
the most he meant by that story. He was inferring the story of the Book of Enoch that we know John Dee valued very much, with all his Enochian overtones that he's famous for, that he would have known that story. And so it's interesting that later in history, when, copies of the Book of Enoch from Ethiopia were obtained by James Bruce at the end of the 18th century, that those versions of it matched the versions of the story that were valued earlier in history by John Dee, when nobody really supposedly had copies of it.
Right. Didn't you say that he had 2 copies? Didn't he bring back 2?
Yeah, he brought back 3.
3. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, and interestingly, one of them went to Louis XV, which I thought is interesting during that time of history, him being English or Scottish oriented. So maybe not a surprise, since he was Scottish, actually.
That's true.
Yeah, but the other one went to England.
The old alliance.
Third one, yeah, the third one I don't know. But yeah, you do see, I mean, people take that for granted. Scotland and France are well connected.
Oh, yeah.
Mary Queen of Scots, other intermarriages like the earlier Dukes of Albany marrying into the de la Tour family.
Exactly.
Aspects like that. Even the James II's wife was directly related to the de la Tour family, and Charlie, Bonnie Prince Charlie, supposedly fathered an illegitimate child with Madeline de la Tour.
Oh, wow.
Which are one of these kind of Merovingian families that value the stories of Mary Magdalene. In fact, both the Dukes of Albany married women named Anne de la Tour, and one of them produced a genealogy where she suggested she was descendant of Belle Marie, an Egyptian princess.
Oh, okay.
Which is wild because it vaguely matches the story of Queen Scota.
Scota, yeah.
Right. Or Sarah, the Egyptian girl in the story of Mary Magdalene at Sainte Marie de la Mer in France.
Right.
So they're one of these Merovingian families related to the Plantagenets that had those values that may point to them believing they were related to Mary Magdalene or Christ himself too, in that way. And that feeds back to the value of Arcadia too, because all these same families had that value as well.
Yeah.
As part of it.
So neat. So neat. I left this message up here just because Sharon wants to tell you how much she loves your book, Oak Island and the Arcadian Mysteries.
Thank you, Sharon. It makes me feel good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Always like to hear that. Let's see, again, trying to get through as many of, Daniel, that's kind of what Cort and I were just, Daniel says he believes Enoch's vault was recreated on Oak Island. Yeah, that's one of the ideas that I put forward early on with my theory, and Cort and I were talking about that pre-show. And we just kind of talked about the idea that, he could have, Philip Sidney easily could have drawn from that tradition for sure.
Lots of people believe that, see that parallel. And as John points out, and you have that's even a degree in Scottish Rite Freemasonry today that involves the story of Enoch. So sometimes when you see these stories that have that kind of imagery applied to them, you can always assume there's a Masonic overlay or appreciation of what's going on there.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Jason, thank you, Cort. A lot of great information being shared tonight. Yeah, Jason, I agree. Cort, we had grand plans here, right before we went live of how many different things we wanted to get through. We didn't really get into all of the stuff that we'd kind of talked about. I didn't really get into the De Medici connection. Maybe that's a story for another time, but
All right.
I want to be respectful of your time, and we have a lot of great viewers who tune in every couple of weeks whenever I do this. So I want to thank you guys for showing up. We're going to draw this to a close. Before we do, Cort, can you give everyone a shout out of where to find your information, your website, your name of your latest book, all your books? Now's the time to plug.
Okay, awesome. Well, you can see all of my 10 publications if you just word search Cort Lindahl books. And that includes my latest Timeless Arcadia, Treasure Myths and Legends Revealed. A lot of that is for free on my blog, survivalcell.blogspot.com, which you can also get just by searching Cort Lindahl blog. I know that's a lot to remember. But I'm always on Facebook. If y'all have any questions or anything, just contact me. And lately, I've started a video production service to help people if they aren't adept at that and they would like to get an idea out there at reasonable rates. I can make a video for you.
Nice.
And I'm always here on Facebook posting my findings. I'm kind of taking a break from writing a little bit, but I've got some ideas on the back burner. Maybe a book about the White House Meridian.
Oh, cool.
And aspects like that. My book before this one was the American Treasures and the Declaration of Independence. And I found 3 or 4 good stories and mysteries that all include the imagery of the Declaration and the influence of Thomas Jefferson and Sir Francis Bacon as well. The Bacon family there were a lot of Bacons in early Virginia, and some of them even worked for Thomas Jefferson. So that's very interesting and exposes a lot too. So always here to chat if you guys want to ask questions or contact me on Facebook.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And Tom Burns chimes in with everybody has a plan until the first question is asked. Thanks very much. Yeah, it's kind of that, was it Mike Tyson philosophy? Everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. Thanks, Tom.
Perfect.
We have BC St. Jean. Thanks, Corey. Your knowledge is amazing. Sharon May is Disney chiming in. Can you talk a little about Briar Island or Frog Island for possible treasure locations? And she also brought up this next one. I'm trying to scroll down.
Right. Well, look at my video about the undersea coal mine of Sir George Bruce. Could relate to islands that are adjacent to Oak Island. And that story did expose some connections to the Anson family and Flora MacDonald, the Jacobite heroine that I feel is part of my founding fathers theory of Oak Island. So yeah, there could be some connections to those outlying islands there.
Yeah, I highly recommend that video. When you first put that out, I don't know. I had never even known that existed, and that just blew my mind. So yeah, definitely check that out, gang.
Right.
Very cool. Yeah,
and
check
finally,
out all the Cort's.
As a teaser, Jake and John and I are working on something really big that's going to blow your minds that we can't talk about yet, but it's really cool, and hopefully we'll have some of that coming out in the next several months that everybody will be interested in. So stay tuned.
Which is, speaking of which, Cort said he's taking a break from writing, so I need to finish my current project so I can take a break before we really dig deep into that, Cort. I'm excited. This is going to be fun.
It is. It's going to be a good one.
Yeah. So listen, gang, definitely check out all of Cort's videos. It's well worth your time. You probably just, if you've never watched any of his videos, as you probably just saw, Cort, you're a wealth of information. I'm honored to know you, and I'm really glad that you came on tonight. This was a lot of fun, and sometime we should really plan out maybe a free for all with you and I and John. Would be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. It's good. Thank you for having me. It's always great to chat with somebody who's so well informed that can understand what I'm saying. It's, you know how that is, I'm sure.
You're preaching to the choir there.
Yeah. And we got lots more to talk about. We got the Bruton Vault. We got the Beale Treasure. We got Mount Shasta even, and some weird goings on in California.
Oh, yeah.
That everybody will be interested in if you're interested in the ghost of Bacon and Oak Island and other similar stories. There's kind of all these weird connections between all of these things, even with some of the same families quite often.
Absolutely. So, yeah, to be continued, my friend. I'm going to kind of pop you out and wait in the waiting room there. I want to wrap things up with you after the show.
Sure.
And I'll be right with you. Thanks again, man. This was a lot of fun. All right, gang. The thing is that, every once in a while you get, a sort of a rare treat of someone who is so incredibly well informed and can just tell a story like that. What a treat that was. Like I said, be sure to go out and check out his book. I've been, still, I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. And the level of the information, is just astounding. Daniel, I know your pain. I think we all know. So listen, gang. Sharon is asking about the link to his video. Sharon, just go to YouTube and Google Cort Lindahl, or search Cort Lindahl. You're going to find he has a whole series of videos. Really, really great stuff there. And he just has such a great way of telling a story. So, all right, gang, I'm going to pop on out of here. I want to thank you once again all for, coming in and spending some time with us. What a treat. A lot of fun. And we'll see you next time. Couple weeks, we'll be doing this again, gang. Take care and stay safe.